Captain Sarah Lawson wiped down the bar at the rusty anchor with the steady rhythm of someone who had practiced the same motion for weeks. Yet her mind stayed sharp beneath the tired expression she showed the customers. The place carried a dim haze that mixed old wood, cigarette smoke, and the low rumble of voices that blended into a constant backdrop. Sarah let her eyes move from face to face in a quiet sweep, taking in posture, tone, and small details that most people never noticed. Every sense tuned to the possibility that someone linked to the weapons network might walk through the door. Living under a false name wore on her more than she liked to admit. And each night, the weight of pretending felt a little heavier. She reminded herself why she was there as she reached for a stack of clean glasses. The network moving stolen military hardware through the San Diego port had already slipped past investigators twice, and Colonel Rebecca Hayes trusted her more than anyone else to catch the pattern before it disappeared again. That trust carried its own pressure. A silent expectation that Sarah would notice the moment something shifted in the current of the room. She could feel the pull of that responsibility settle along her shoulders as naturally as her duty belt once had. As the night moved toward 2:30 p.m. in its slow rhythm, Sarah sensed a change in the air that had nothing to do with the drink orders piling up. Conversations dipped for a breath, then rose again as if the entire room had inhaled at the same time. She could not explain why, but she felt the same edge she used to feel before a mission turned. Something was coming, and she knew the quiet would not last. A burst of noise rolled through the rusty anchor when a group of Marines pushed through the door, their energy crashing into the dim room like a sudden wave. Laughter, boots on wood, and the scrape of chairs filled the space. Yet something in their entrance felt rehearsed to Captain Sarah Lawson. Her gaze settled on Staff Sergeant Logan Parker, who moved with the loose sway of someone pretending to be drunk while keeping his eyes far too alert. His focus drifted to her more than once, and each time it carried a sharpness that made her instincts rise. Sarah kept her hands busy behind the bar, wiping a rim, stacking glasses, and reaching for bottles with the easy flow of someone used to long shifts. Inside, her mind stayed on high ground, watching the Marines settle at a corner table with an eagerness that did not match their sloppy laughter. Logan leaned back like he owned the room, yet his gaze kept cutting through the haze toward her as if checking her reactions. She felt the weight of that attention in a way that did not fit a normal off-duty night. The atmosphere began to shift in small ways, almost too subtle for anyone else to notice. A few customers glanced over, then looked away as if unsure why they felt unsettled. Sarah recognized the pattern from past missions, the quiet moment when a room changed shape before the threat revealed itself. She could not point to one detail, yet everything in her training told her these Marines were not here for drinks alone. As she handed off another order, the tension wrapped a little tighter around her ribs. Nothing had happened, but something waited just outside the edge of the moment, and she felt it moving closer. Logan Parker closed the distance to the bar with a slow confidence that felt practiced, and before Captain Sarah Lawson could step back, his hand clamped around her wrist. The grip was firm enough to show intent, but controlled enough to keep anyone else from noticing anything unusual. Sarah kept her shoulders relaxed as she spoke in a steady tone meant to diffuse the moment while hiding the flash of alertness racing through her. She eased her hand in a small motion that looked casual to others, trying to create space without triggering a reaction that would expose who she really was. Logan leaned in instead, and behind him his friends pushed back their chairs in near-perfect sync. Their eyes were too focused, too steady, and the sloppy smiles they wore were nothing more than a mask. Sarah caught the way one of them shifted his weight to the balls of his feet, a stance that belonged in training rooms and not in a bar. The sudden rise of their bodies from the table confirmed what her instincts had warned her from the start. She lifted her eyes toward the back door for half a second, measuring the distance to the exit and the path she would have to take if things broke open. A bar towel hung near her left hand, and a heavy glass sat within reach. Both options she filed away under improvised weapons if she needed them. Her breathing stayed slow and even, the kind of patterned control drilled into her during long nights of Special Forces training. Every detail of the room sharpened as she felt the tension coil tighter. Logan's grip tightened just enough to signal that he was not acting on impulse. This was deliberate, planned, and aimed at her. Sarah steadied her stance, knowing the moment before a fight often carried its own kind of silence. And she felt that silence closing in now. Logan Parker jerked Sarah forward with a sharp pull that cut through any last hope of avoiding a fight. And she reacted before thought could catch up. She shifted her weight, rolled her wrist, and drove a nerve strike into the inside of his forearm, forcing his grip to release as pain shot through his hand. His momentum carried him off balance, and she guided that force with a tight pivot, sending him over the counter where he landed hard among the scattered bar mats. The room snapped from noise to shock as chairs scraped and boots hit the floor. The other Marines moved in fast, their steps tight and coordinated even as they pretended to stumble. Sarah felt the rush of air from the first punch and raised a serving tray to intercept it, the impact ringing in her arm. She answered with a strike into the shoulder gap where muscle meets nerve, dropping the Marine to one knee with a gasp that cut through the bar noise. Another came from behind and locked his arms around her ribs, lifting her off the ground in a hold meant to pin her in place. Sarah drove her head back, catching his nose with a sharp crack that loosened his grip long enough for her to twist free. She planted an elbow into his solar plexus, forcing the air out of his lungs and sending him bending forward. Her heartbeat hammered, but her training held her steady. Each movement chosen to disable without exposing more strength than a bartender should have. She kept her focus narrow, aware that any sign of her real identity could compromise the entire mission. Logan climbed back over the counter with a darker look in his eyes and pulled a folding tactical knife from his pocket. The blade caught the dim light as he stepped toward her, forcing her to break a bottle against the edge of the bar and raise the jagged glass to keep distance between them. She shifted her stance, protecting her center line and watching for the angle of his wrist. The room felt smaller as she tested each step, trying to end the fight quickly without letting the weapon drift closer. She could feel the tension rising toward a breaking point, and every breath reminded her that the danger was no longer contained. The bar doors swung open with a crash as military police flooded into the room, their boots striking the floor in a rhythm that cut through the chaos. The shift from scattered fighting to controlled authority froze nearly everyone in place, and the sudden silence felt louder than the shouts that came before it. Lieutenant Daniel Ortiz stepped forward at the front of the group with a steady calm that belonged to someone used to taking charge in tense moments. For a heartbeat, Sarah Lawson hoped the fight was finished. Logan Parker did not stop. He pushed through the line of overturned stools and lunged toward her with the same reckless intent that had started the clash. Sarah felt the sting of a fresh cut at her side as she turned her hips, caught his arm, and drove him into the floor with a controlled throw meant to stop him without causing more damage than necessary. His breath hit the wood in a heavy thud while the MPs closed in to restrain the others. Ortiz reached her side in 3 quick steps, and the moment he addressed her by her real rank, the room shifted again. She could feel the tension rising toward a breaking point, and every breath reminded her that the danger was no longer contained. The bar doors swung open with a crash as military police flooded into the room, their boots striking the floor in a rhythm that cut through the chaos. The shift from scattered fighting to controlled authority froze nearly everyone in place, and the sudden silence felt louder than the shouts that came before it. She felt the toll of the night settling over her, along with the sharp realization that the mission had changed the second her cover cracked open. The danger was deeper than what she had seen so far, and she knew the hardest part was still ahead. Medical staff worked with steady hands as they stitched the wound along Captain Sarah Lawson's side, and she kept her eyes on the ceiling rather than the needles. The sting came in sharp pulses, but she pushed the discomfort aside because her thoughts stayed fixed on the bar, the Marines, and the way Logan Parker had looked at her once. He realized who she was. The secure facility around her felt quiet in a way that made every sound stand out. She knew the silence would not last long. Colonel Rebecca Hayes entered with Lieutenant Daniel Ortiz as the medic finished tying off the stitch. Hayes carried a tablet that already looked heavy with information, and her expression told Sarah the news would not be simple. Ortiz stood near the foot of the bed, while Hayes explained that Logan admitted he had acted under orders and believed he was part of a routine counterintelligence sweep. Several Marines linked to him showed unexplained deposits that did not match their pay records. Sarah took the tablet and scrolled through Logan's profile. His service record was clean, marked by steady advancement and commendations that appeared earned, not given. There were no disciplinary flags, no signs of resentment or instability that would push him into illegal activity. The realization that he had been used tightened something in her chest and revealed how deep the operation might run. Hayes waited until Sarah set the tablet down before revealing the part she had been holding back. Colonel Richard Westbrook, from Special Programs Procurement, had appeared in 2 separate intelligence flags connected to the diverted weapons. The moment Hayes spoke his name, the mission changed shape, shifting from a hidden role behind a bar to a direct confrontation with corruption inside their own ranks. Sarah let out a slow breath as the weight of the situation settled in. The exhaustion from the night remained, but beneath it, something steadier rose. She understood the danger had grown, and despite the ache in her side, she felt a renewed determination to follow the trail wherever it led. Colonel Rebecca Hayes delivered the news with a steady voice, but Captain Sarah Lawson still felt her stomach tighten when she heard it. Staff Sergeant Logan Parker would be released under supervision, fitted with a GPS monitor, and brought into the next phase of the operation to help identify the buyers. The idea of working beside the same Marine who had grabbed her in the bar made her pulse rise with frustration. She kept her expression controlled, though the tension settled deep under her ribs. Logan entered the briefing room with a guarded posture and a small device already secured around his ankle. He did not look at Sarah at first, and when he finally did, his eyes held regret mixed with the weight of orders he could not ignore. He spoke quietly about what he knew of the exchange process, describing drop points, code phrases, and the pattern of movement the buyers preferred. Sarah listened in silence, taking in every detail without giving him more acknowledgement than necessary. When preparation began, she checked her Glock 19, sliding a magazine into place and tapping it to ensure the feed was clean. She laid out 2 more magazines on the table and inspected each one with careful focus. Logan stood across from her, describing the approach route near the harbor as he traced a path on a worn map, pointing out where the buyers usually parked and how they secured the area. The air between them stayed tight, shaped by distrust that neither tried to hide. Sarah reviewed the final plan with a cold professionalism that left little room for conversation. Logan nodded along, avoiding her eyes as if he understood he had crossed a line that could not be taken back. The coming operation forced them into the same space, tied together by necessity rather than trust. Beneath the tactical focus ran a quiet strain of emotion, the uneasy shift from hostility to reluctant cooperation. Captain Sarah Lawson and Staff Sergeant Logan Parker reached the harbor under a low stretch of clouds that made the night feel heavier. They moved between long rows of shipping containers that formed narrow corridors lit only by scattered security lamps. The covert support team stayed out of sight along the perimeter, checking in through quiet bursts of radio traffic that Sarah felt more than heard. Every step carried the weight of what waited ahead. Near a plain white van stood 3 men, their shapes sharp against the glow of a nearby lamp. Sarah recognized Colonel Richard Westbrook the moment he turned his head, and the sight of him made the air feel tighter in her chest. She pressed a hidden transmitter at the seam of her jacket in a motion small enough to pass for adjusting the fabric. Logan kept his pace even as they approached, though Sarah sensed the tension rolling off him. Westbrook studied them with a calm that did not match the danger of the meeting. One of his men took a closer look at Logan, his face tightening as recognition formed. The moment cracked open like thin glass, and the man shouted a warning that cut through the still night. Gunfire erupted, and Sarah pulled her Glock 19 while ducking behind a container as rounds snapped against metal nearby. Logan shouted the direction of the shooters as he laid down controlled bursts meant to force the men into cover rather than hit them outright. Sarah moved along the edge of the container, counting the rhythm of the shots and waiting for the brief pause that came when a rifle magazine ran low. She stepped into the gap, fired 2 precise rounds, and then dropped back into cover as the support team closed in from the flanks. Westbrook bolted toward the pier, sprinting faster than she expected for someone of his age and rank. The boat at the end already had its engine running with a driver gripping the wheel. Sarah chased him down the wooden planks, choosing not to fire because the angle risked hitting the driver or someone farther down the dock. The wind rushed at her face as she jumped the final few feet and landed on the rear of the boat. Inside the small cabin, Westbrook fought with the desperation of someone who knew the consequences waiting for him. He slammed her against the console, and pain flared along her side as the stitches tore open. She pushed through it, caught his wrist, and turned his arm until his balance broke. With one quick movement, she locked a rear arm bar and forced him onto the bench seat. He struggled for another second before she secured his hands with a zip tie. The engine noise, the smell of fuel, and the weight of the moment pressed around her as she caught her breath. The danger was not gone, but the mission had turned. Logan stood on the pier watching her, and for the first time she felt he was fighting on her side for real. Morning settled over the harbor with a pale light that softened the sharp lines of the containers and the boats tied along the docks. Captain Sarah Lawson stepped off the patrol craft with Colonel Richard Westbrook in restraints and handed him over to the waiting security team. Colonel Rebecca Hayes met her at the edge of the pier and confirmed that the weapons network had been dismantled and its members taken into custody during the night. Sarah let the words sink in while the ache from her reopened wound pulsed beneath her bandage. She stood still for a moment, breathing in the quiet that followed the long hours of chaos. Logan Parker watched her from a short distance, with his hands resting at his sides and his posture straight in a way that carried respect rather than tension. He offered a small nod that acknowledged everything they had been through, and she answered with the faintest hint of one in return. It surprised her how far they had come from the clash in the bar to the fragile understanding formed in the fight at the harbor. 2 weeks later, she stood in a pressed uniform inside a bright hall that smelled faintly of polish and old wood. General Amanda Wolfenson stepped forward to present her with an Army Commendation Medal with a Valor device, and the applause that followed felt both distant and warm. Sarah's thoughts drifted to the quiet missions she had taken in the past and the long nights when courage happened far from any spotlight. She understood now that victories like this one were made of countless unseen choices and moments that no one else would ever know. When she saluted the general, she felt gratitude steady her breath. She also felt a quiet resolve settle in, the kind that came from knowing she had done what needed to be done even when the cost had been high. The recognition mattered, but the meaning behind it mattered more. Captain Sarah Lawson stood outside the facility where the last reports of the investigation had been filed, and the quiet around her felt different now that the conspiracy had been dismantled. She thought about the meaning of courage and how it often lived in moments that no one else witnessed. The missions that shaped her most were never the ones marked by ceremony, but the ones that unfolded in silence, far from any sign of recognition. This truth settled over her with a calm weight. Her thoughts drifted back to the night in the bar, a shift that was supposed to be routine and safe enough to blend into the noise of ordinary life. She remembered how quickly everything had shifted, how a single decision had exposed a chain of corruption hidden inside their own ranks. She realized that every small choice she made that night, from remaining calm to fighting with restraint, had shaped the outcome in ways no one else could measure. The value of those choices had nothing to do with being seen. She also thought about the people who served quietly, the ones who carried burdens that would never be written into official reports. They showed a kind of strength that came from doing what was right, even when no applause waited at the end. Their courage was built from steady moments and unspoken sacrifices. It reminded her that honor did not always need an audience. As she took a slow breath, she felt gratitude settle into her chest. She hoped others might look at the quiet acts around them and see the strength hidden there. Real courage, she realized, lived in the choices made when no one was watching. And those choices shaped the world more than anyone knew.